U.S. President Joe Biden has extended sanctions against Zimbabwe, saying ongoing repression by the country's government presents a continuing threat to peace and security in the region. President Biden's move to renew the two-decade-old sanctions came a few days after the European Union decided to extend by another year its own arms embargo against the southern African country. Hello, welcome to my channel. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. In a message to the U.S. Congress dated March 1, 2023, Biden said Zimbabwe had not made any reforms to warrant the lifting of the sanctions that were first imposed in 2003 for alleged human rights violations and electoral fraud. Biden said the Zimbabwean government's security services throughout the year routinely intimidated and violently repressed citizens, including members of opposition political parties, union members, and journalists. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe's former president Robert Mugabe gave the green light to his paramilitary supporters to invade commercial farms, seizing some 23 million acres of land. The property rights of commercial farmers were revoked, and the state resettled the confiscated farms with small-scale agriculturalists. Land reform in Zimbabwe officially began in 1980 with the signing of the Lancaster House Agreement as an effort to more equitably distribute land between black subsistence farmers and white Zimbabweans of European ancestry, who had traditionally enjoyed superior political and economic status. The program's stated targets were intended to alter the ethnic balance of land ownership. The government's land distribution is perhaps the most crucial and most bitterly contested political issue surrounding Zimbabwe. It has been criticized for the violence and intimidation which marred several expropriations, as well as the parallel collapse of domestic banks, which held billions of dollars worth of bonds on liquidated properties. Zimbabwe's land reform program has led the United States of America to impose illegal and unjustified sanctions under the so-called Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act of 2001, which was amended with a view to further tightening its provisions in 2018. In it, the U.S. government instructs the U.S. executive director to each international financial institution to oppose and vote against any extension by the respective institution of any loan, credit, or guarantee to the government of Zimbabwe, or any cancellation or reduction of indebtedness owed by the government of Zimbabwe to the U.S. or any international financial institution. Supplementing these sanctions are executive sanctions of March 2003, which have been renewed on a yearly basis. It is clear that the sanctions are all-encompassing, contrary to claims that they are ring-fenced and targeted against a few individuals. The European Union also introduced its own sanctions in February 2002. While the EU lifted most of its sanctions in 2014, those against the Zimbabwe Defense Industries Company, senior government officials and service chiefs, as well as an arms embargo, are still in place. The EU insists that it will maintain the sanctions under constant review in light of political and security developments in Zimbabwe. The US and EU sanctions against Zimbabwe are illegal and unjustified because they violate Article 41 of the United Nations Charter, which states that sanctions can only be decided on by the UN Security Council. Cognizant of this, in its Resolution 39-210 of the 18th of December 1984, the UN General Assembly called on developed countries to refrain from threatening or applying trade restrictions, blockades, embargoes, and other economic sanctions incompatible with the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations and in violation of undertakings contracted multilaterally or bilaterally against developing countries as a form of political and economic coercion which affects their economic, political, and social development.